kick this thing off. So thank you all so much for joining us here today for our first ever Harrison History at Home. Not just History at Home, Harrison History at Home. My name is Crystal Weimer. I'm the Executive Director of the Harrison County Historical Society in Clarksburg, West Virginia. And thank you all for taking part in this little experiment that we're doing today. You know, obviously we're all being impacted by COVID-19. And so, you know, the programming that we would typically do at the Historical Society, we're having to be a little innovative with how we reach folks and how we talk about, you know, our community stories. So thank you all for participating in this so much. And as I said earlier, before we started the meeting, this recording of this presentation will be available probably up tomorrow or possibly Monday. We will share that on our Facebook page, as well as our website for the Historical Society. Next thing I'd like to bring up is I would love to thank Joel Strangis for graciously offering to do this for us today. When I thought about doing one of these lectures, he was the person at the top of my list to contact to share this story of Pasquale Belott with their community. He did such a fantastic job back with us in 2018. I've known Joel since 2017 and been with him as a part of his, you know, journey finding Pasquale, and it's been kind of an honor to participate in that and help him flesh out this story, so to say. So thank you, Joel, for doing this today. We really appreciate that. Okay. So a little bit about the format this afternoon. We're gonna talk about Pasquale first, and then we're gonna do a Q&A session after that. And immediately after the Q&A session, Joel would like to talk about kind of some of his research methods and give you all some tips if you wish to do your own research journey. It's been incredible what he's been able to dig up and the resources that he's uncovered, and so he wanted to share those with you, and I agree that those are wonderful resources, and so he will wrap up with that today. Okay, if you have a question throughout any time during the presentation, we ask that you go at the bottom, along the bottom with your toolbar there. There's a little box that says chat. You are going to click on chat and then type your question in. And then when it's time for the Q&A session, we will go in there and get your questions and ask Joel, you know, what you want to know. And he will answer those as best he can. Okay.
Crystal,
yes.
We can't hear you at all.
Oh, that's not good. Am I muted? I'm not muted. Okay, so what's going to go on with my computer is I am on satellite internet, which is one of the joys of being in West Virginia, is the broadband is not the best. And so,
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Me?
Here, looking at this.
Can y'all hear the speaker?
If you go.
Okay, make sure that your computer audio is up so that you can hear me. I am not muted, so, but it may be issue because I do have satellite internet in my home. Okay, yeah, make sure your computer audio is up if you haven't turned it on.
Can you read that? I'm not sure anybody can read that.
Okay. All right, so yes, if you can't hear me, there's probably an issue with whether you don't have your computer audio up enough, or as I said, I do have satellite internet, and so it will occasionally, when it comes from me, it's probably going to be fuzzy from time to time, and I really can't control that, unfortunately, because that's just what I have. Okay, so I think that, oh, one last thing, we are bringing this presentation to you for free today. You know, I know that these are tough times for everybody with, you know, unemployment and just everything being as insane as it is. But any donation that you wish to make to the Historical Society during this time, we would appreciate that. We are unable, of course, to do typically our usual fundraising and any donation that, you know, is welcome to help us through these tough times, because as I said, we are really unable to do our typical type of fundraising going forward for, you know, the foreseeable future, because we really just don't know what's going to happen in the next several months with COVID-19. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. So I'm done talking, and I will turn it over to our guest speaker, Joel. So take it away.
Thanks so much, Crystal, and thank you for all you've done to help me and for allowing us to do this today. It's a real honor, and I hope we can give people a good program. So thanks to you and to the Harrison County, West Virginia Historical Society for your assistance. I do have to thank my wife, Diane, for encouraging me and supporting me through all of this. And I just wish that everyone here, I hope that everyone here is well, and that you stay well, and that your loved ones stay well. These are definitely interesting times. You know, it's a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. So we are in interesting times, and Crystal and I have tried to put together a good program for you, and I'm going to read my presentation so that I get through it, a number of illustrations and whatnot for you. Okay, so let us begin. Murder in the Cafe. It is Friday night, February 21, 1931, in Clarksburg, West Virginia. A cloudy winter sky hides moon and stars. Temperatures hover around freezing. Downtown theaters are finishing their day. Tonight, the Ritz Theater presented a live performance by Ray Walzer, starring Dorothy McHale and Joel McCrea. At the Opera House, they were showing Captain Applejack, in which John Halliday is a pirate by day and an English gentleman by night. The Bad Man appeared at the Grand, featuring Walter Houston as a Mexican bandit with a good heart. 2 nights before, the Grand had offered one of the year's top movies, Little Caesar, with Edward G. Robinson as an Italian gangster who uses bullets to move up the ranks, but ends up destitute, alone, and shot dead. After taking in a movie, a mother and daughter walked a half mile from downtown toward their home on the east side. The mother, Elsie Woolard, is an astrologist who offers readings in her home. She is walking with her 9-year-old daughter, Laura. About 11 p.m., Elsie and Laura reached their 2-story home on Meigs Avenue, where Elsie's husband, Herbert, is home with their 2 sons, Henry, age 13, and Herbert, age 11. At 52 years of age, Herbert is almost 20 years older than Elsie. He earns a living with a route of slot machines he services, and he owns some gas wells in the area. Occasionally, he plays trombone in a local band, but lately he has been struggling with the flu. Shortly after 11, Elsie says she's hungry and decides to walk a block and a half to the Sanitary neighborhood to the small cafe and greets the owner, George Diamatoni. After finishing her sandwich at the cafe about 11:30, she heads out the door. But according to Elsie, she sees across the street her former client, Patsy Belott, a longtime Clarksburg resident from Italy who struggles to make living as a woodcarver. Elsie and Patsy are not on good terms, and she calls Herbert asking that he come to the cafe and escort her home. So this is the building of the former cafe, and as you can see, it's been updated, and it's now a barber shop, which I could use desperately these days. So Elsie calls Herbert asking that he come to the cafe and escort her home. Herbert arrives promptly and walks with Elsie towards home, but Patsy is nowhere to be seen. On the way home, Elsie tells Herbert that she borrowed a nickel from the cafe owner to make the phone call, and she would like to repay him. Herbert gives her the nickel and continues home. Elsie returns alone to the cafe. When Elsie enters the cafe, the owner has gone to his living quarters upstairs. But according to Elsie, Patsy is there and wants to talk. Talk turns to argument. Argument turns to blows as Patsy slaps Elsie and a scuffle ensues. As they wrestle through the cafe, they smash out a window in the front door. Diamatoni returns and tries to separate the combatants. As he grabs hold of them, one in each hand, the barrel of a rifle slides through the broken window. A shot is heard. Patsy falls to the floor. Within 10 minutes, police are on the scene. Patsy is taken to the hospital. As he lay dying, Patsy refuses to say who shot him, but he offers a wish that he be buried in his hometown in Italy. A priest arrives and administers the sacraments. Patsy is dead by 1:30 a.m. Police officers leave the cafe and travel 700 feet to Elsie's home. At the house, they arrest Herbert for shooting Patsy. In the initial search of the Woolard home, officers find a .38 caliber pistol, but not a rifle. Elsie follows her husband to the police station, telling police and anyone else who will listen that at the cafe, Patsy had made advances to her together with insulting remarks, and she had intended to fight for her rights as a woman. She also claims that Patsy had been following her about the streets for the past 2 years. Despite repeatedly telling her husband and the police about the situation, she also says, without explanation, "I think that shot was intended for me." A month later, at his trial for murder, Herbert will admit that he did shoot Patsy, but he and his lawyers will argue that Herbert shot to defend his wife. Many years later, Patsy's family in Italy continues to maintain that it was premeditated murder, a plot between Elsie and Herbert to get rid of a talented but indigent Italian immigrant, and that perhaps there was more to the Elsie and Patsy relationship than the Woollards admit. Chapter 2, Pasquale, where are you? Once upon a time, in a small town in Italy, there were 5 brothers. It sounds like the start of an Italian folktale, but this is the true story of the 5 Belott brothers, and especially the story of the youngest of those 5 brothers. Let me explain how I got involved. In the fall of 2016, I went to Italy to trace my family roots. My grandfather was born in Sanitary, a small town in Calabria, the southernmost region of the Italian peninsula. I should probably pause here for just a second to say that the town is today called Sanitary. But when my grandfather lived there, and when the Belott brothers lived there, it was called Sanbiase. 2 words, Sanbiase. So sometimes you'll hear me say Sanbiase, which is its name today. Sometimes I'll use Sanbiase, which is the name it was 80 years ago. So please forgive me on that. Also, Patsy has 2 names. Patsy Belott, which is how he was known in Clarksburg. And again, excuse me if I'm not entirely consistent on how I use those names. My grandfather, at age 9, together with his mother and his 2 brothers, followed his father to America. Before I went to Calabria, I knew that Strangis was a common name in Sanbiase, and that finding direct relatives would be difficult. But I hoped to find and meet nice people named Strangis. During my search in Sanbiase, I met Fernando Vescio. This is the Strangis butcher shop. Macelleria is a butcher shop. So I met Fernando Vescio. We can go back to the Fernando picture, that's fine. There we go. So Fernando, I'm in the middle, and the fellow on the right side is Francesco Strangis, who owns that butcher shop. During my search in Sanbiase, I met Fernando Vescio, a retired physician and an expert on the town's genealogy. The first time we met, he took down my information about my family, and we met the Strangis family tree that went back to the early 1800s. He also helped me fulfill my goal of meeting a number of nice people named Strangis, such as Francesco, standing next to me there. At the conclusion of our second meeting, Dr. who died in Pittsburgh, and then assist him in having the uncle's remains returned to Italy for burial in the local cemetery. Naturally, I said yes. After my return to the U.S., Dr. Vesho sent me the great uncle's name, Pasquale Belott, and his date of death, February 21, 1931. A little internet research found that Pasquale did not die in Pittsburgh, but in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and that he was murdered, death by gunshot. Dr. Vesho neglected to tell me about the gunshot part, but he said he did know. On the recommendation of David Hochin of the Clarksburg's Waldemar Library, thank you, David, personnel there were kind enough to send me some newspaper articles about the murder of Pasquale Belott, known locally as Patsy Belott. In fact, they were so interested in the story that they went beyond the amount of free time they are generally allowed to give. The story has captivated me ever since. Finding the grave, however, has not been as easy as finding the story. Newspaper articles, Catholic Church records, and death certificate all agree that Patsy Belott is buried at Clarksburg's Holy Cross Cemetery. But where? There are no records of burials at Holy Cross before 1958. And there is no visible headstone for Pasquale Belott, nor for Patsy Belott. In fact, of a cemetery of more than 50,000 graves, some 900 have no headstone. Patsy was an indigent and moving between friends for a place to sleep when he died. In order to raise money for his funeral and burial expenses, his friends tried to sell some of his wood creations. Since no grave marker occurred to me, no grave marker is visible, it occurred to me with small budgets, his friends may have installed one of the less expensive horizontal markers flush with grass level. You can see a few of those in the lower center of the photo there. One of these horizontal grass level markers, if not properly maintained, could have disappeared below grass level over the 80 years plus since Pasquale's burial. Eventually, I identified an area of Holy Cross Cemetery with a number of headstones for those who died in the early 1930s that has a significant amount of open grass covered space that might hide a sunken marker. You can see here, this is a marker for Pete DiPolo. Could we go back to the up close? It's okay. It says that this fellow died, Pete DiPolo died November 13, 1930, which is about 100 days before Pasquale died. So logically, this is an area where people in the early 1930s might have been buried. So I had found this area and had some idea about the target area, but I would have to find some folks to help me look for Pasquale's marker that might be under the ground. Graciously, Crystal Wimmer, Executive Director of the Harrison County, West Virginia, invited me to make a presentation about my search in September of 2018. Perhaps some of those with us today were with us then. If so, thank you very much. In addition to giving an update to that point, I invited participants to join us the following day to search the target area of Holy Cross Cemetery for a hidden grave marker. The next day, to my delight, 4 volunteers arrived to join us in the search. You can see our group in the photo. Sean Jeju and Marilyn Blake of the historic Clarksburg, West Virginia Cemetery Preservation Alliance, who've done a lot to recover cemeteries that have totally been forgotten over the years. They are on the left. And the brother-sister team of Peggy Karras and Norm Karras flank my wife Diane on the right. We're obviously all in our Sunday best. Thank you to all of you for helping on that 90-degree day. And I want to give a special shout out here to Marilyn, who I learned recently broke her wrist, her left wrist, and she's left-handed. And is going to have surgery to correct that break. So a special shout out to you, Marilyn. So in the target area that day, we marked with ribbon 3 lines, and you can see on the behind Sean there, we had some ribbon, and we marked 3 lines across vacant ground that interrupted 3 rows of headstones. We were not looking for graves. We were looking for markers that might have disappeared over the years. Working in teams of 2 along the 3 lines, we probed 8 to 10 inches deep. In 2 hours of work, we had only 1 hit, but our find turned out to be a broken 1/2 of a pedestal upon which an upright headstone might have been mounted. We were disappointed, but satisfied we had done all we could do to search that area. I think we now have done all we reasonably can do to find Pasquale's grave. The only remaining option might be to hire experts with ground-penetrating radar equipment to probe the suspected area, looking for a headstone that might not even exist, but we have no budget for that. If my search for the grave of Pasquale Belott has come to a stopping point, my search for the person that was Pasquale Belott goes on. And that brings us back to the 5 Belott brothers. Chapter 3, Coming to America. Pasquale Belott was not the first of his family to come to the United States. In fact, he was not the first to come to Clarksburg. The Belott brothers are poster boys for the Italian immigration that occurred between 1880 and World War I. An exodus often called the greatest voluntary diaspora in world history, when more than 10 million Italians left Italy. Initially, they headed for Northern Europe, and then later to North and South America, and even Australia. Unlike many Italian immigrants, however, the Belott brothers were not from an impoverished family. Their mother was from a wealthy family, and they had a family business. And they had a nice 2-story home in San Bias. You can see the house behind me. Now, the house is now abandoned, but we're talking about a house where Pasquale lived over 100 years ago. And curiously, my grandfather lived about 500 feet up this same street. But Pasquale was the youngest of the 10 children of his family, and he was about 7 years older than my grandfather. So it would be overly optimistic, I think, to say they knew each other. According to Pasquale, the family, all the boys were taught to be wood carvers. But Dr. Vescio tells me the family business was making and repairing wagons and carriages. Of course, a deluxe carriage would include a great deal of fancy wood carving. Pasquale's parents, Maria Antonia and Giovanni Belott, were married in 1864 and would eventually have 10 children. Sadly, 3 of the first 4 died in infancy. The Belot's first surviving child was Vincenzo, born in 1867, and he was the first to leave Italy, departing at 16 years of age for Argentina. The next surviving child, Giovanni, born in 1876, followed Vincenzo to Argentina in the closing years of the 19th century. From an economic perspective, Giovanni was the most successful of the Belott brothers. In Argentina, he established a factory for making wood products, such as frames for mirrors and paintings. He was also known, however, for having an oversized temper. The third brother, Domenico, was the first to travel to the United States. He arrived at Ellis Island in October 1903. On the ship's manifest, he declared he was headed for New York, but he ended up in Pittsburgh, perhaps convinced to go there by 3 of his shipmates from San Bias, who gave Pittsburgh as their destination. The fourth Belott brother, Valentino, who would eventually become Dr. Vescio's grandfather, arrived at Ellis Island 15 months after Domenico. Here's Valentino. Valentino's stated destination was to join his brother. By April of 1908, however, Domenico was back in San Bias, and Valentino was probably there as well, because on April 23 of that year, in San Bias, Domenico married Giuseppa Scalise. At the end of 1908, Valentino initiated a second round of travel to the U.S., arriving at Ellis Island on Christmas Eve. He was headed to Clarksburg, West Virginia, to join a cousin who had settled there. And early in 1909, Domenico made his second trip to the U.S., stating that he was going to Clarksburg to join his brother Valentino. There's a lot of back and forth here, but follow me. Domenico was back home in Italy by May 1910, after no more than 14 months in the U.S. Then, on December 27 of that same year, Maria Antonia Belott, mother of 10 Belott children, died. 2 weeks after his mother's death, Domenico returned to the U.S. for a third time, arriving at Ellis Island at the end of January 1911. On the ship's manifest, on Domenico's line, an ink stamp in capital letters states, non-immigrant alien. In other words, Domenico had joined that group of persons coming to the U.S. for work, but with no intention of staying permanently. By February 1912, barely 12 months after entering the U.S. for the third time and final time, Domenico was back home in Italy. Travelers similar to Domenico, who came to the U.S. intending to earn money and return home, were often referred to as birds of paradise. Some scholars estimate that as many as half of those aliens entering the U.S. in the years between 1880 and 1920 eventually returned home. Domenico entered the U.S. 3 times and returned to Italy 3 times. Valentino entered twice and returned twice. Chapter 4, The Golden Child. Let us return finally to Pasquale. Pasquale was the 10th of 10 children born to his parents. He may have been the golden child. As the last of many children, he may have been the one thought to have great talent and great opportunity for the future, and who therefore received special training and encouragement. By the way, you can just see from the photographs that we have seen that the 2 Belott people sons were not from impoverished families. These were people who did have money. Dr. Vesho tells me that their father was a very authoritarian man, and if they went west, they wouldn't have been the first young men to do that. Anyhow, here's Pasquale. In a September 1926 newspaper interview, Pasquale reported that his father was a master at inlaid wood and passed the skills down to all of his sons. Pasquale told how his father gave him a small set of carving tools when he was only 4 years old, in order to begin teaching him the wood carving trade. Before Pasquale was a teenager, he was sent to study in Naples, a center of Italian carving. He then had a 1-year internship in Palermo, Sicily, and followed that up with studies in the north of Italy. Finally, at age 14, Pasquale was sent to work with his brothers in Argentina, but he did not go alone. In truth, there was a 6th Belott brother, Saverio Moschetti. One day, before they had any children, Giovanni and Maria Antonia found on their doorstep an abandoned baby boy. The young couple adopted the child and gave him the last name of Moschetti, the name of one of the clerks in the room where they were registering the infant. Thus, in 1905 or 1906, 14-year-old Pasquale and the almost middle-aged Saverio headed for Argentina to work in the wood shop with Vincenzo and Giovanni. Things went well for many months. Eventually, Pasquale became a foreman in the wood carving department, but after Pasquale had been with his brothers for about 18 months, he suddenly returned to San Biase. According to Dr. Vesho, Pasquale broke what must have been a valuable mirror. He was so worried about the possible response of his irascible older brother Giovanni that he went to the harbor, got on a ship, and headed back to Italy. In March 1911, 2 months after Domenico arrived in Clarksburg for his third and final trip to the U.S., Pasquale arrived for his first and only trip to the U.S., a trip that would last the final 20 years of his life. On the manifest, Pasquale indicated he was going to Clarksburg to join his brother Valentino. Since Domenico arrived only 2 months earlier, it seems safe to say that for a portion of 1911, all 3 of the youngest Belott brothers were together in Clarksburg. The Belott brothers remind us that millions of immigrants crossed the Atlantic, worked, saved money, and returned home wanting to make a better life for their families. In total, the three youngest brothers crossed the Atlantic 14 times. Domenico made 3 round trips. Valentino made 2 round trips. Pasquale made a round trip to Argentina and then a one-way trip to the U.S. And finally, in 1924, Domenico made a crossing with his wife and 4 children to permanently join Vincenzo and Giovanni in Argentina. But let us return to the mysterious life and death of Pasquale Belott. Chapter 5, A Friend and Client. In his 1926 interview, Pasquale reported that when he first arrived in Clarksburg, he went to work in the tin mill, a reference to what became the Weirton Steel Company. In 1909, the company was noted as the largest manufacturing enterprise in central West Virginia, with 900 employees. The company used the area's abundant natural gas resources to produce tin plate, steel roofing, and other metal products. In fact, this company made Clarksburg. In 1905, local investors in the Clarksburg plant had hired J.R. Phillips of Pittsburgh to direct the operations. When Phillips died unexpectedly in a railroad accident, the investors promoted Phillips' assistant, Ernest T. Weird, to head the organization. The connection to Pittsburgh through Phillips and Weird may have meant that as demand for good workers increased, a call went out in the Pittsburgh area promising good wages in Clarksburg. When Patsy had accumulated what he felt was sufficient capital, he left the mill and established a wood shop of his own, selling his own carvings and making and refurnishing furniture. By 1916, thanks again, Crystal, for finding this for me, he had an ad in the local paper for his woodworking skills, offering, as you can see, make old broken furniture like new, and don't buy, let me fix it. He could even, he said, make you any kind of antique furniture at a small cost. In June 1917, Patsy registered for the military draft, although there is no evidence that he ever served in the military. One of my most interesting finds, and this was given to me by Dr. Vesho, was that in August of 1920, Patsy obtained a U.S. design patent for a wooden clock case. So he designed the case, not the clock. The clock would have been installed by someone else. Curiously, the patent application was prepared and signed by George H. Duthie, a local attorney and active member of West Virginia's very active Socialist Party. Despite his best efforts, Patsy's woodworking business never thrived. In the 1926 interview, he reported a limited market for his work in Clarksburg. Most of my customers here are doctors and lawyers, professional men, he said. They seem to appreciate artistic things more than other kinds of people. He related how people often mistook his valuable inlaid wood projects for painted decoration. And he complained that when people want to buy something, they go out of town to get it. In Clarksburg, he told the interviewer that he liked Clarksburg. Living is too high in New York, and people up there don't want to know other people. You're all alone there. I like Clarksburg best. The relationship between Patsy Belott and the Woollards, however, was complex. Patsy's depression over his work may have led him to seek out Elsie as an advisor. According to Elsie, when Patsy initially approached her in February 1928, she refused to treat him due to the state of his mind. A few months later, in July 1928, she took him on as a client, seeing him regularly until February 1930. According to Elsie, I treated him at my home where he often ate and was a welcome guest. A local newspaper reported that at some point, Pasquale had a key to the Woolard home and he entered almost at will. Elsie said that she and Herbert befriended Patsy because they felt sorry for him, but that ill feelings began early in 1930. On that day, she agreed to loan Pasquale $7, but refused his request for a loan of $15. When she refused to have the large amount, she recalled, he threatened to ruin my husband, myself, my daughter, and my family. Elsie also reported that hard feelings increased when it became clear that Patsy had become infatuated with her, and he tried to force his affection on her. Some of Elsie's comments add to the fog surrounding their relationship. On the day of Patsy's death, the evening paper, the Telegram, reported that while at the police station earlier that day, Mrs. Woolard said, "He made love to me strongly for the last 8 months, but I was not in love with him. He followed me around and made my life miserable." We can only speculate on the meaning of "he made love to me strongly." When the appraisers assigned to search for things that could be sold to pay for Patsy's funeral and burial expenses visited the Woolard home, Elsie showed them a carved wooden chest, a telephone stand, and other items made by Patsy. Surprisingly, Elsie announced that she and Herbert would donate the items to be offered for sale to pay Patsy's funeral expenses. His final expenses. She was offering the items, she said, despite the fact that she and Herbert held the items at Pasquale's request as collateral for a loan they had given him, a loan of $1,600. How does an unemployed woodcarver come to owe $1,600 to people who once counted him as a friend and client? That amount in 1930 has a 21st century value of more than $20,000. It would take a long time to get to $1,600 by loans of less than $15. There was also written evidence of the Patsy and Elsie relationship. 3 days after Patsy's death, Herbert's defense attorneys announced that they had 2 threatening letters to Elsie, said to have been written in the hand of Patsy Belott. That was a quote. And one signed with his name and the other received the day of the shooting. Later that same day, Clarksburg police reported that they had found among Patsy's possessions 2 letters to him written in a feminine hand, one of them containing a lock of hair. According to the newspaper, or according to the police, they had obtained a sample of Elsie's handwriting, and it was similar to the writing in the letters to Patsy. Police gave the 2 letters they had found at Patsy's belongings and the lock of hair to the office of the Harrison County prosecuting attorney. Chapter 6, Trial by Jury. The charge against Herbert Woolard was first-degree murder, and that he did feloniously, willfully, maliciously, deliberately, and unlawfully slay, kill, and murder Pasquale Belott the night of February 20 with a rifle bullet. Murder in the first degree was a capital crime in West Virginia, punishable by death by hanging. In fact, on the same night that Pasquale was shot, 2 men were executed at the West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville. One of the men, William Claude Adams, had in an act of jealous rage murdered his wife, her mother, and his wife's aunt. The thought of those executions must have weighed heavily on Herbert and Elsie. Facing serious charges, Herbert retained as part of his legal defense team James W. Robinson, a leader of Clarksburg's legal profession, with 8 years' experience as Harrison County criminal court judge. On advice of his attorneys, Herbert, still in jail, made no comments about the case. The Harrison County prosecuting attorney was Will Morris, who had served in that post for 25 of the past 27 years. Morris's most notable prosecutions to that date were the Mafia Trials of 1923. In one case, 3 Italian immigrants, alleged to be members of the Italian Black Hand, were convicted of murdering an Italian barber who resisted paying extortion money. In another case, a 4th Italian immigrant was convicted in another extortion-related murder. All 4 were executed early in 1924. Those prosecutions, together with other non-death penalty convictions obtained by Morris, are given credit for significantly reducing the amount of Mafia and Black Hand activity in Harrison County. The trial of Herbert Woolard for the murder of Pasquale Belott began on Tuesday, March 17, 1931. Judge John C. Southern, a 6-year veteran of the criminal court bench, presiding. The court required only 45 minutes to assemble a jury. 21 men were interviewed. 9 of them stood aside due to scruples about inflicting the death penalty. The remaining 12 became the jury, all men, and I think we can assume all white men. The halls of the county's red brick Victorian courthouse were packed as clients of Elsie and Italian friends of Patsy squeezed in to get close to the overflowing courtroom. Reporters commented it might have been the largest crowd at a Clarksburg trial since the Mafia Trials 8 years earlier. As opening arguments were made, Elsie sat at the defendant's table with Herbert. In the first row behind them sat their responded. This was a contradiction of his earlier statement to 2 police officers in front of 2 reporters that he recognized Herbert as the shooter. Morris' bullet rifle found at the Bullard home. He said that even in its damaged condition, it could have fired a single bullet. At the end of the first day, Herbert's attorneys began their defense with 20 character witnesses who gave Herbert, quote, an excellent reputation, unquote. On the second day, Elsie was the first witness and testified that Pasquale had followed her around and lurked outside their home. As they examined her, defense attorneys presented the letters allegedly written by Pasquale. Elsie produced checks written by Pasquale as proof that the letters were in his handwriting. There was no postmark on the envelope of the first letter, dated March 13, 1930, shortly after she discontinued treating him in March of 1930. But the letter contains worrisome language. I love you more than life. You have never given me the honor of being alone with you. I will have your body and soul throughout eternity. It also includes a brief love poem in Italian. It was signed as ever your dangerous secret lover, Pasquale Belott. A note received on February 18, 3 days before the shooting, called on Elsie to watch for a message tomorrow morning and oblige. Signed, sincerely yours, Pasquale Belott. The second letter, dated February 18, and received at the Woolard house the day Pasquale was shot, was the most threatening. And this is a picture of the actual letter from the district court. Again, thank you very much, Crystal, for going over there and obtaining it. The second letter, dated February 18, and received at the Woolard house the day Pasquale was shot, was the most threatening. He writes, my dear Mrs. Woolard, do you think you are getting by refusing? For the last time I ask you to see me somewhere. Get this. For the last time, I am warning you, understand? And if you refuse, don't blame me. For heaven prove I will ruin and destroy your life. Or any man which would take your side. End of quote. In addition, the letter accuses her of squealing on him for a fire that destroyed some of his belongings, and for which he was said to have received an insurance settlement. Quote, you nor anybody else can prove that I did it. Remember, I always get the person. Refused, however, to sign the letter, saying, I wouldn't give you the satisfaction by signing my name. Of course, we cannot ignore the point that these letters contain dangerous and serious threats. The surprise of the stand. On the stand, Herbert Woolard admitted he shot Pasquale. In his defense, Herbert told his attorney in the courtroom that he did not intend to kill Pasquale, but to shoot to protect himself, his wife, his children, and his home. He said that after returning home from the cafe alone, he became uneasy and picked up a rifle and went down to the restaurant. He said he shot when it appeared that Pasquale was reaching in his pocket for a pistol. When asked why he fled the scene after shooting to protect his wife, he said, I was afraid someone was spotting and would get me. Homer Strassnyder was the first of the defense attorneys to sum up Herbert's cause. He reminded jurors of the unwritten law that permits a man to protect his loved ones. His arguments brought tears to some of the jurors. Judge Robinson, as part of the defense team, also spoke on behalf of Woolard, reminding jurors of the presiding judge's instructions that if Woolard believed his wife was in great danger of death or serious injury, and if he acted without malice or previous intent, then they should give a verdict of not guilty. The jury left the room, came to a conclusion, and re-entered the room in exactly 20 minutes. They delivered a unanimous verdict of not guilty. In the course of our conversations, Dr. Vesho asked me one day, who represented Pasquale? Of course, the answer is Will Morris, the prosecuting attorney. Yet one can ask if Morris did all he could to see there was justice for Pasquale. Certainly, Morris charged Herbert with the most serious crime possible, deliberate and unlawful murder. He also presented a ballistics expert who testified that the bullet that killed Pasquale was fired from a rifle owned by Herbert Woolard. And yet there seems to be oversights. Morris did nothing to challenge the letters that Elsie said were from Pasquale. The only testimony that the letters were in Pasquale's handwriting came from Elsie. Furthermore, Morris never produced the letters and the lock of hair said to be from Elsie to Pasquale that were in Morris's possession as the prosecuting attorney. Did those letters encourage Pasquale in his love for Elsie? Did they prove there was more to the Elsie and Pasquale relationship than had been revealed? If the letters did reveal a relationship, would they have provided a motive for Herbert to kill Pasquale? And finally, Morris, although charging Herbert with deliberate murder of Pasquale, never pursues or even introduces the possibility of collusion between Herbert and Elsie to bring an end to Pasquale's role in their lives. As Herbert and Elsie walked home from the cafe that night, upset about the letter received that day, and knowing that Pasquale was in the area, did they decide to lure him into a conflict with Elsie that would justify deliberate and fatal action by Herbert? Did Herbert at 11:30 at night leave his 3 children alone and return to the cafe with a rifle just because he was uneasy? Did Morris, after having prosecuted murderous Italian mobsters 8 years before, pull his punches and give more than the benefit of the doubt to Herbert, having resolved that, if at all possible, an upstanding citizen was not going to be hung by the neck until dead over the killing of an obnoxious and possibly dangerous Italian? Perhaps after our current situation has improved and we return to semi-normal, I can convince someone in the office of the Harrison County prosecuting attorney to go into the basement and look for an 89-year-old file labeled Woolard. And perhaps in that file, they will find 2 letters. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to share this with you, and appreciating you staying with us all this time. If there's any questions or things people like to discuss, otherwise we can go on. I've got prepared some brief notes about doing research that might be helpful to some, that might be obvious to others. And there's probably people among us who are much better at this than I am. But I know from my own view, anything like this, if I get 1 or 2 suggestions that can be helpful, then I feel that listening to somebody else talk about their research is always helpful. Crystal?
If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and type those in the chat. And if you want to stay with us throughout the research tip portion, I can go ahead and put that up now. And if Joel, maybe we'll go ahead and move on with that. And then if there's questions in the chat, we'll get to, oh, we have 1 question. Okay. Do we know anything of what happened to Elsie and Herbert Woolard after the trial?
Not other than, they raised their family. They bought a home. Eventually, they bought a home up on the hill closer to the high school, homes up there. And they gave the home for $1 and love and affection to one of their sons. I forget which one, the home on Meigs Avenue. It was either, either Herbert or Herbert or the older son. So they did that. Elsie died in the 1950s. Herbert lived until 1972 and died in Ohio. And I suspect that he'd gone there to live with one of his children. And I think by that time he was, about 90 years old. It listed him as a trombone instructor, that he'd been doing instruction of trombone, tutoring of trombone in his later years. That's about all we know. Curiously, the very brief obituary never mentioned that he had shot someone or had been tried for murder and exonerated. So that's about all, at least at this point, that I know about the future of the Woollards. He was very proud of the fact that he owned that house. He bought that house in 1916 before he was married. He didn't marry Elsie until 1919. So he was proud of the fact that he owned that house free and clear.
Okay. All right. We have another question regarding your search in Holy Cross Cemetery. They want to know, what did you use to penetrate the ground to try to find the headstones or those flat headstones that might have been buried underneath?
We used whatever we could get, and I invited the people to bring their own things. As you saw, Marilyn had a very long screwdriver that she just stuck into the ground. It was about an 8 to 10 inch long blade on that screwdriver. We had some flags, like you might, if you had a wedding and you were gonna mark out a parking area with tall 5-foot poles that you can buy to mark park here, don't park there, kinds of things, and drove them into the ground with a hammer. We weren't going 6 feet down. We knew there were graves down there someplace. What we were looking for was these flat markers that might have gotten covered over with soil, and we somewhat arbitrarily said probably they weren't any more than 6 or 8 inches deep, even after all those years.
Okay, we have another question. They want to know if you have ever used any of the research sources from the Italian Embassy in Washington, D.C.
I haven't, and that's a thought. There's also the National Italian American Foundation resources either one of those. I haven't, and maybe that's another place to look.
There you go. Okay. I remember, because I've done a lot of research with you, I recall, Joel, you telling me that Pasquale could play the clarinet, or he had a clarinet case, and we know that Herbert played in the band at one of the theaters. I forget which one, it's escaping me.
The Ritz, actually at the Ritz,
Okay,
which we showed up front. Yeah.
Just wonder if they also had some kind of connection through that, because they did have community bands in the area.
Yeah, that would be interesting, but I've not. Right. I've not been able to track anything from that, and I've got the history of Clarksburg and the history of the Italians in West Virginia or something, and I don't see any bands. There's a picture of the Italian American band from about 1924. But Pasquale's not in it. There's about, I showed the picture. The people aren't all named, but I showed the picture to Dr. Vesho, and he said, no, Pasquale's not in that picture. So it would be nice if we could link them that way, and perhaps that's how they got to know each other initially. But it's one of those things so far that you speculate about.
Another question, do you think Pasquale is related to any of the Belott or Belott families that are currently living in Clarksburg? That is a common name around here.
They're distant cousins, like the fellow in the picture who was my seventh cousin. They could be very distant cousins. I didn't. Now, I do have to say, and I've not investigated this, that there are people in the, clearly, in the ship manifests who travel with Pasquale and with all three of the brothers that came to Clarksburg. There are other people from San Bias who end up coming to Clarksburg with them. And I've not carefully written down those names and searched those names to see if any of them would have descendants currently and that's an area that I could go to. But it's pretty sure Pasquale was never married, and best we know didn't have any children, certainly didn't have any children that bore his name. And Dr. Vesho told me there's a couple there are graves for, and I sent pictures of their grave markers to Dr. Vesho, and he said no, that they were not related directly. They're just the Veshos. There's a lot of Veshos. There's a lot of Strangises. I'm told by someone in a town of 8,000 people, there are 600 Strangis households, which means so. And at the same, there are many Veshos. I have cousins who are Veshos, who, if they're related to Dr. Vesho, it's again that is also remote. I have cousins in the U.S. who are Veshos. So Italians aren't real creative about names. They tend to use names over and over.
Okay. Does anyone